Gentlemen, good morning and welcome. Although the clock in the room actually says it's a bit early, I'm told that's a bit slow, and I'm told it's 10:30. So I'd like to welcome you all and everyone to this meeting of the Place Services and Economic Growth Policy Scrutiny Committee. Those present here today are members of the committee and any substitutes that they've appointed, together with appropriate officers by invitation. We're here this morning in Committee Room 1, which is Essex County Council's new hybrid meeting room. The room does have automatic cameras and sound tracking with microphones in the ceiling, and this is the first public trial of the room in this format. So we hope everything works, but it could be a learning process. So with the new system, can I please, a couple of pointers. You have been told, you have been recommended about procedure. Can I please ask you to continue to speak clearly and if possible, do not whisper. In previous in this room, we've had a microphone in front of us, and even with that, it wasn't sometimes easy to hear what everybody was saying. So if you've got something to say, please make sure it's loud. Please keep any other sounds to a minimum, particularly whispering, shuffling of papers, typing loudly. I think that would be interesting. I see if anybody is typing loudly, because that would bring the camera to focus upon you. Please bear in mind that there may be a delay with the camera moving, but to continue speaking as you would, and the audio will pick you up. Please be conscious of what you have on your screens. This isn't the first time that this will be noticed, but if you've got a laptop or a tablet on, as the camera moves, it may pick up what's on your screen. So if you don't want to embarrass yourself or us, I won't make any obvious comments, but please be aware that the camera may pick up on your screen. Please bear in mind that the ceiling microphones are very sensitive, I'm told. So if you want to make any comments about either the speaker or a point, and you don't really want it to be recorded and published, then I suggest you keep it very quietly to yourself, because we don't want any embarrassment. And the main reason for this, of course, is the last point is that we are live streaming this meeting on YouTube, and a recording of this meeting with it in its full format will be available afterwards to anybody that requests. We don't expect a fire drill this morning, so if the alarm does sound, please follow the officers out of the building and gather in the cathedral grounds. We don't have any COVID policies at the moment, or strict COVID policies at County Hall, but if any member or officer felt it was appropriate for them to wear a mask, please feel free to do so. There should be no embarrassment. There should be no feeling. And if that was what you felt was appropriate, then please do so. So finally, in my remarks, I'd like to welcome the Corporate Policy and Scrutiny Committee members this morning. They've been invited for item 6. I have a feeling they'll stay for the whole meeting, and we welcome you, including their chairman, Councillor Chris Pond. Chris, you and your committee are very welcome, and we look forward to you taking a full part in the meeting itself. So for anybody who's new, we have some new members, and we will have new people watching us for the first time. So just as a quick brief introduction, Place Services and Economic Growth Policy and Scrutiny Committee, we technically look after 4 portfolio holders, and the 4 portfolio holders divisions are highways maintenance and sustainable transport, devolution, arts, heritage and culture, waste reduction, economic renewal, infrastructure and planning. So that's what we're responsible for. It does pose the question, I wonder what the other scrutiny committees have got left with such a wide remit. So we go to item 1 on the agenda, which is membership, apologies, substitution and declarations of interest. And first of all, very pleased to welcome two new members to this committee. One is Councillor Susan Barker and the other is Councillor Paul Gadd. They've joined our committee. We look forward to your contributions and particularly in Susan's case, huge experience. They do replace Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Shaw.
Apologies.
Or any other organisation, that would be a fine, wouldn't it?
Goes to the chairman's charity.
Yeah, oh yeah. I think that's that might be a sticky bun or something later on. So they do replace Councillor Stevenson and Shaw, and it gives me an opportunity to thank Councillor Stevenson and Shaw for their work to date. And I'd particularly like to mention Maureen Shaw, who was on our Task and Finish group and was a vice chairman. And I'd like to thank her for her services. And she's moved onwards and upwards. She is now deputy portfolio holder for highways. So we wish her every success. So, Justin, in terms of apologies, are there any apologies for today?
Apologies received from Councillor Moore.
Okay. We now normally ask any members for any declarations of interest, to remind you that declarations may also be made during the meeting as and when items occur. So are there any declarations that any members would like to make at this stage? I see no declarations, thank you. So what item one is we're asked to note the membership of the committee. We're asked to look at apologies and substitutions. We're asked to look at declarations of interest. Are members happy that these points have been noted? Great, thank you. Item 2 on your agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. We now need to approve as a correct, true and accurate record of the meeting held on the 21st of April and to consider any matters arising. First of all, are members happy to approve the minutes?
Agreed.
Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Are there any matters arising that anybody would like to note at this stage that they don't feel are covered by the agenda, the following agenda? I see nothing, thank you. So over to Justin to explain how matters arising is dealt with.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to note that we now have a matters arising report on your agenda, as that's page 8 of your agenda pack. So this outlines what happened at the meeting last time in terms of country parks and the extra information and actions that were requested. And obviously this is something that we'll have going forward on all agendas now.
Okay. Any questions or comments? I see none, thank you. Item 3, as mentioned, since our last meeting, Councillor Shaw has left the committee to take on the position of Deputy Cabinet Member for Highways. I'd like to formally congratulate Councillor Shaw again on her new role and put on record again my thanks for her contributions to that. It does mean we need to appoint a Vice Chairman of this committee. We already have one with David Blackwell. We now invite nominations for the position of Vice Chairman, and I wish to nominate and propose Councillor Mike Steele. Do I have a seconder?
Seconded by Councillor Vance.
Thank you very much. Are there any further nominations, or does anybody wish to put themselves forward? I see no action, thank you. So no formal vote is needed. So Councillor Steele, for good or bad, I am pleased to welcome you as a Vice Chairman.
Thank you very much.
You want to say anything?
No, just thank you very much. I'll do it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Item 4 is, again, it's an option for members of the public to submit questions. Do we have any questions from the public?
No questions from the public have been received.
Okay. And that's something, as members, you might want to take back to your residents, if you wish, if it's something that is a strong issue in your area, if they wish to bring it to this committee. And it's one of those series of portfolios that we deal with. then we welcome questions and to deal with them. So item 5 is the work programme. That's pages 9 to 13. Just to remind everybody that this is a member-led group, and if you have topics you wish to scrutinise or topics and ideas that you wish to discuss, this is an ideal opportunity for you to do so. So if you have items that you feel should be added to the work programme in advance of the meeting, can I ask you to please either speak to myself or Justin, and we will to deal with that. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I would like to see towards the end of the year a report on library statistics. We've been told we have a number of new members. It would be interesting to see if that's resulted in increased usage of our libraries and increased loans. So perhaps towards the end of the year we could have something in.
Okay, that is a good point. Thank you very much. Just to be clear, because isn't libraries split between two of us?
It's split between the People and Families Committee and us. I think in terms of what Councillor Barker is requesting, that would sit with this committee, but I can go away and check and come back to you.
Are you happy with that?
Yes, I'm happy, Chairman. I don't particularly need a long report. I've just been interested in the actual statistics.
Lovely.
Thank you.
So work programme, Justin.
Thank you. So the work programme is outlined on page 11 of your agenda. One change to the written version, so bottom of page 11, the item on culture and the arts that was due to come to the committee on the 21st of July, that has been put back and will now come in October, and that will be replaced by the item that's on the top of page 12, which is the highways maintenance update. So at your next meeting, you'll have highways maintenance update and an update on the LED streetlight rollout. And as the chairman says, obviously, if you have ideas for items that you would like to see added to the work programme, then just let us know. Thank you.
Any comments at all?
I was just wondering whether we should, obviously we're having the specific presentation on the Tovey waste today, but I wonder if we should add on a more general sort of waste strategy for the work programme.
I think that's within our remit, isn't it? Because we're waste reduction, yeah.
I don't know whether you've covered it during
Why
the year.
don't we see how this meeting goes today, and then it's an appropriate request, and that seems a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other points? Okay, so we now move on to item 6, and I welcome formally to the meeting, first of all, Councillor Malcolm Buckley, who is the Cabinet Member for Waste Reduction and Recycling. Malcolm is here via link, and Malcolm, I understand you're one of the increasing group of people that have COVID, and we obviously wish you the very best, and please be careful and look after yourself. So we welcome Malcolm Buckley. We also welcome Councillor Bob Massey, who is the Deputy Cabinet Member for Waste Reduction Recycling. Bob, nice to see you here. Thank you very much. We also welcome Nicole Wood, who is the Project Owner and Executive Director of Corporate Services. We welcome Jim Aldridge, who is the Programme Director for Waste Transformation, Jim. We welcome Alec Creasy, who's a Chief Technical Advisor. Alec, nice to see you here. They are basically here this morning to talk about the termination of the contract for the MBT, which is the Mechanical Biological Treatment Facility at Basildon. There's been a great deal about that in the press, and to outline future plans for the facility. In your agenda pack on pages 14 to page 22 is a report on this issue, which has been pre-submitted. We'll now receive a presentation from Jim Aldridge. I can't remember having seen a document that's prepared for discussion and identifying follow-up. I can't remember having seen a document that was in so much detail and so much clarity, but it still leaves plenty of questions to ask. So I think I'm going to hand over now to Councillor Buckley for you to lead your team in. And as you say, we wish you well.
Thanks very much for your good wishes, Chairman. And I'm glad to say I seem to be on the road to recovery. I've still tested positive this morning, I'm afraid. This is a topic which I did want to bring before the committee, and as you know, we've had informal chats with yourself and Councillor Bond relatively recently on the progress that's been made. Dealing with the waste across the county is a very key issue, and it's also a very expensive issue to deal with. So it's important, I think, that we get the facts on the table as far as what's happened with this particular project and where we go in the future. Currently, we've got to almost the end of what I think is the legal process on this, and Mr. Aldridge will be going through that in some detail with the committee. It is a topic which I've been involved in for very many years, albeit sometimes on the periphery, and going back to 2002 when this project was originally put forward by Lord Hanningfield. I was actually leader at Basildon Council, and I can recall quite a number of, shall I say, heated discussions with Lord Hanningfield at that time. The outcome of which was we got the Toby plant built, and as you'll hear from Mr. Aldridge, it hasn't delivered everything that was promised. We do want to come back to the committee later on in the year with some discussions around the waste strategy, which will be dealing with the, if you like, the outcomes of the termination of the contract on this particular plant. But I think probably the best thing is if we can allow Mr. Aldridge to do the presentation, and then we will all be happy to take questions. There may be some questions which, because of the technicality or because of the legality, may have to be responded to the committee in writing, and I hope the committee will accept that as being the proper way to deal with some matters. But if I may hand over to Mr. Aldridge, I'd just say, should there be any problems, Councillor Massey has my full authority and backing to answer anything if there's any failings with the technology.
Jim, over to you. Sorry, I do apologise. I should have mentioned that Nicole is here remotely. So, Nicole, sorry, I didn't welcome you properly. Nice to see you. Jim Aldridge.
Especially, thank you. If we could share the presentation, please. That's great. If we could move on to slide 3, please. Malcolm has done introductions. Thank you. I'll just take you briefly through the purpose of today's session, please. And then I've got about 7 slides for you in total. It doesn't replace the report that you would have received with the agenda, but I'm looking to give you a presentation which perhaps adds a little bit more context to the discussion, you know, and gives more context to the questions that, of course, you'll wish to ask ourselves in a moment. So the journey is a long one, and it really goes from the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy, which was put together and launched in about 2007, and obviously it brings us to this room today. As I look at that journey, you know, much of that I've travelled, there are 6 sections in total, which is looking at the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy and where that came from and what it was designed to deliver. Looking at the procurement of the PFI contract and also the resulting contract. The High Court litigation and the number of disputes that were had between the 2 parties. And all of that I'd see very much as discussion for today. I think undoubtedly as well there will be questions around the future use of Coulthard Road site where the MBT facility is at this point in time, and also about the need for a new Essex Waste strategy, the EWS. And undoubtedly there'll be some questions I'm sure around that because it is part of the narrative and part of the story. But what I understand has been agreed already between councillors is those 2 points there around the future use of the site and also around the future Essex Waste strategy will be subject of a separate place scrutiny committee. So there may be some questions which are asked there today, but you know, because that's taking place in the future, decisions around those 2 topics simply have not been taken at this point in time. Next slide, please. So the first main slide there I have is around the waste hierarchy. I think it's a picture or a diagram that everybody in the room will be familiar with. You may have seen it the other way round with the point at the top. I prefer to use the diagram this way round with the inverted triangle because I think it shows the principles, the 4 R's of the waste hierarchy in more detail. I'm aware that many of you will understand this and have been adhering to this for a number of years, but I think it's fundamental really to our discussion today, so it's just worth focusing on that for a moment, if I may. Before I do as well, it's also just worth reminding as well that we have 3 main waste streams that are managed between us, ECC, as the Waste Disposal Authority, and also the districts and boroughs as well as the waste collection authorities. And those 3 main waste streams are recycling or recycle it, which is the paper, the cards and the glass. Bio-waste, which is the food waste and the green waste. So green waste, maybe when you cut the grass or you trim the hedge at the weekend and then put that in the appropriate receptacle. All of that combined is known as bio-waste. And then when we've done as much of that adhering to those 4 R's, which I'll come to in a moment, there's always going to be, unfortunately, and I think certainly in my lifetime, there's always going to be some leftover waste, some residual waste, also known as black bag waste, black bin waste. It's all the same thing. It's effectively, once we've reduced and recycled as much as we possibly can, then that residual waste is what's left. And it's worth just reminding ourselves at the beginning of this conversation that the MBT, Tovey Eco Park, was only ever there to manage the residual waste and to process and to recover the energy from that residual waste. All that great reuse and all that great recycling that our residents in Essex do continues to be the same. In fact, it's completely unaffected by the MBT. It's never gone to the MBT and it continues to be taken elsewhere for reprocessing and deriving the energy from those waste streams. So let's take you first then to the top of the hierarchy there. The most desirable, aspect is around waste reduction. The best waste we ever have is never seeing that waste in the first place because we prevent it from happening. It has been a driver. It was a driver in the original strategy. It's a driver now, and it will continue to be a driver in the new Essex Waste strategy. We see it reflected in the portfolio member's title, Council Member for Reduction and Recycling. We've seen a lot of the waste reduction, over the years, and we've seen that with people, buying, less food if they don't need it, or we've seen really big movements around packaging, food packaging in particular, where food packaging has reduced quite considerably over the years. There's still a huge amount to do. And waste reduction going forward will be absolutely a key part of the strategy and a key part of the waste team in ECC and the waste collection authorities. Once the waste comes into fruition and we have purchased something or used a product, then it's about making sure, that we keep that in use as much as possible. A whole different conversation to be had about circular economy, but that's the principles there about making sure that we reuse those products as much as possible. So it's the usual piece which people have been doing for years, the handing down of the school uniform, within the family from the older sibling to the younger sibling, or it might be that we've moved and we don't need that big mower anymore. Rather than taking it to a recycling centre, it could be passed on to a neighbour or someone else that needs it. About making sure that we reuse those products as much as possible before we dispose of them for treatment or disposal. Once we've taken that point, it's moving down to the 3rd R there around recycling, and about making sure, as we do, and we're good at this in Essex, about making sure that we put the right waste in the right bin. From there, and about making sure that we recycle those products wherever possible and they don't get left, ideally within the residual waste stream. So reduce, reuse, recycle, the first 3 principles there of the waste hierarchy. The 4th one that got added on in more recent years is around recovery. And this is about the fact of recovering as much energy benefit from that residual waste. You can see there I've put a little arrow there with MBT on. The MBT standing for Mechanical Biological Treatment Facility. The Tovey facility, if we call it the MBT or Tovey, we're referring to the same facility in London. That plant there, as I said, just taking residents' residual waste and designed to recover, as much energy benefit from that as well. You could also address that as well with the MBT for a bit of recycling. On the front end, there was a mechanical process there which looked to take out the recycling which had unfortunately been left within the residual waste as well. So that was the mechanical element of it, but primarily there for the recovery. And then at the bottom there on disposal, so at the bottom of the waste hierarchy there is about disposal. If none of these other 4 R's can be adhered to, then waste, residual waste, whatever there is left of that residual waste ends up in landfill, which unfortunately is a situation that we're in Essex at the moment, and we're embarking upon that journey to move us away from that point as quickly as possible. So the first of those points then, so really the beginning of the journey, as I said, is the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy. As it says on there, it was produced in 2007. It was due to have a 25-year duration, so to run through to about 2032. It is a statutory requirement amongst county councils in order to have a strategy about waste management. I think even if it wasn't, it's just a very sensible strategy to have in place with the importance that waste management and waste reduction has for all of us now. It was signed off by ECC and also by all of the districts and boroughs, bar Colchester Borough Council. Colchester chose not to do so, but I know that they adhere to many, many of the principles. The core objective, as I said there, is about adhering to the 4 Rs and about making sure that wherever possible we divert as much waste of that residual waste from landfill and make sure that that's minimised. There's a 50% recycling target in there to be achieved by 2020. And I'm really pleased, that the Essex residents completely smashed that target, achieved early, and I think we're moving around at about 54% recycling at this point in time. But there are more challenges ahead of us. And as we know, there's new targets now that we need to chase down to make sure that we increase that recycling rate up until about 70%. It also identified in that original strategy that there would be a preference for MBT, so again, this mechanical biological treatment facilities, in order to process the residual waste. And there's just some details there around the total waste management budget to just give you some context of some of the early numbers. Next slide, thank you. So, technical key facts here. The MBT facility was designed entirely by the company Abassa Belfabiti, UBB, the contractor, UBB. It was there to treat all of Essex's curbside collected waste and the residual waste from the recycling centres as well, up to a maximum of 417 kilotons per year. Just a little bit of detail and to give some context about the 3 main processing steps residual waste underwent as it went through the facility. First of all, it went through pre-processing, so my referral back to this, pulling out the additional recycling or recyclate from the residual waste. A mechanical process with a picking line as well. Just one bit, for example, as the metals went down the conveyor belt, they'd go through various magnets, and the magnets would attract the metal, and then the metal could be taken off to gain additional recycling. Once that process had taken place, it went into one of 3 composting plants, one of these 3 big biohalls. And over a period of 6 or 7 weeks, there would be big turning wheels that would turn the waste from one end of the biohall to the other. And it was due to see a reduction, or the requirement there was to see a reduction, about half of waste would be reduced through those 2 processes. It then left a very stabilised material, but from that as well, the final part, another mechanical part there was refining, where if there was any glass or stones that was left within the residual waste, and of course that wouldn't compost down, because it's not biodegradable, then again those would be pulled out as well to further reduce the volume and the mass of the waste. The outputs of that was a very stabilised material, so it was stabilised, and therefore you've got considerably less waste, or the plan was to have considerably less waste, and as ECC was responsible for the output at the end, and that reduced the cost to the taxpayer. It also meant as well that you could recover the energy from that product, from the good calorific value. And again, there was an opportunity to send that off to generate energy from waste plants, so deriving that recovery benefit further. But it was stabilised, and if need be, that product was also suitable for landfill. Next slide. So just talking a little bit about the various stakeholders, the players were in this, because it's a PFI contract, as you all know, which makes it quite a complicated setup. So it's worth just identifying some of those entities there. So the first one there, as I've already mentioned, is the contractor, Abasa Balfour Beatty, UBB for short. So deriving from a Spanish waste management company, Abasa, who were there in order to add the waste management element, and then Balfour Beatty, I'm sure a company that's more familiar to you, there to undertake the civils and the construction. Together, they formed an entity, and they were solely responsible for the design of the facility, 100% responsible for that, for the build of the facility, for financing the facility, and ultimately, if it had gone through services, also the operation as well. So we know that as a DBFO contract, which is a standard way in which these PFI contracts operated. They formed a company called a Special Purpose Vehicle, an SPV, whose sole aim of that company was to deliver this contract. It was the only reason that company was set up. It was completed on a 70-30 split in favour of Abasa, the waste management company, and each of those two companies put in a level of equity, about £22 million, showing the split there, 70% of that money put in by Abasa and 30% of that money put in by Balfour Beatty. It was due to be a 28-year contract. Sometimes you see it as 25 years. It's 25 years of operation was the plan from there, with 3 years on the front end for the design and for the build and commissioning of the facility. We used between the parties, between Essex County Council and UBB, a standard, what's called an SOPC4 contract. Just a bit of jargon there, but it's a DEFRA designed and a DEFRA put together contract. The 4 in there stands for version 4, so it went through a number of iterations as it went along the process. And if any county council with a waste management contract wishing to utilise PFI credits from there was required to use this standardised contract. It was a standardised contract in all waste PFI projects. There was little wriggle room really within that contract, and a lot of that was defined by DEFRA, and those were the clauses that needed to be used between the parties. And again, another number there, just to say that the contract over the period of that 25 years of operation was worth in the region of about £800 million. As I said, this was a PFI contract. You can see on there waste infrastructure credits. These were the credits. It's not a loan. It's not to be repaid by DEFRA. They were originally known as PFI credits, Private Finance Initiative, from there. More recently became known as waste infrastructure credits. Worth in the region of just over £100 million. And they were indexed over that period of time. So you can see the indexation figure there as well. The funding, as I said, the funding was provided by UBB, Abasa Balfour Beatty, in order to build and to construct the project. Some of that was done from the equity, which I identified earlier, and also some of that was done by borrowing, known as senior debt, from 3 banks. And we see on that last line there the 3 banks. Standards in that industry, not your usual high street banks, but standards in this sort of commercial industry. Bayern Bank and Norddeutsche, so 2 German banks, and SMBC Limited, which was a Japanese bank. Between them putting in equal amounts of money, then they were the funders who provided the senior debt to the project. Next slide, please. This is my penultimate slide. It just gives you a bit of a route map around that journey that we followed over the years. I've talked about the joint soil waste management strategy, so I'll talk no more about that, about the proposal of introducing MBT plants. Second one there is about the competitive dialogue procurement. So this is the procurement route which was utilised by ECC. The CD process, or the competitive dialogue process, is used for complex projects, and indeed this was a complex project to procure. Is very much tightly governed by the public contract regulations by the PCR, which are dictated by external parties, and ECC adhere to that process. they followed relevant governance and procurement rules along the way and throughout the procurement. That came to a culmination, as it says there, within 2012, where ECC signed the contract with UBB for 25 years of operation. Come 2014, the construction of that facility of the civils element had been completed, and then it was a requirement for UBB, responsible for the design of this plant, in order to take it through commissioning, testing phases, where slowly more and more waste was put through the plant up until the point it was achieving its throughput, and then it was required to pass certain acceptance tests, various performance guarantees which were identified within the contract. As we know, that never happened, and that was never achieved by UBB. They didn't pass those acceptance tests. Now, unfortunately, the reason for that between the parties, between UBB and between ourselves, Essex County Council, were entirely diverse, and they couldn't have been more different for the reasons we thought that was unable to pass the acceptance tests. Therefore, there are a number of disputes which took place over that period since that backstop date of January 2017. And at that point, as those disputes didn't resolve matters, those contractual disputes, that process that you're allowed to follow within the contract didn't resolve matters, officers felt fundamentally that unfortunately the only way to move forward on this and to act in the best interest of the public purse and to protect ECC constituents and taxpayers was to commence High Court proceedings against that contractor, against UBB. Those High Court proceedings take a long time in order to come to fruition. We needed a 6-week trial, which is quite a long trial there, and therefore you wait quite a long period of time in the British legal system in order to find a slot at the court for that to happen. So that didn't happen until May 2019, when, as it says there was a 6-week High Court case at the Technology and Construction Court, the TCC, High Court, but just, as the name suggests, set up to manage disputes of this technical nature. Off the back of that, finally the judge issued the decision in June 2020, and that's when we received the decision that would have been referred to within the report. Is there, commonly on the web, and anybody could go and have a look at that. It's in the public domain. Now that identified from Justice Pepperell, the High Court judge, where he identified, his words, that the fundamental problem with this project was that UBB had made a number of serious design errors. Its density assumptions were incorrect, such that the were seriously undersized and incapable of processing the guaranteed tonnage of waste. He made it very, very clear that the failure of the facility was UBB's fault. Off the back of that decision, ECC were awarded costs awards. I'm sure there'll be questions around that in due course. And ultimately, those, or a vast majority of those costs, were recovered by ECC from the contractor UBB. Unfortunately, this wasn't the end of the story at this point in time. And there was a further High Court case claim, which was brought by Essex County Council with regards to funding arrangements. But that, along with all other disputes, have been put to one side and have been ceased as a result of earlier this year entering into an amendment and settlement agreement, the ASA, between Essex County Council and UBB, which saw an amendment to the PFI contract, which allowed for UBB, entirely at their cost, to demolish the facility, and ultimately at the end of that, for them to hand back to ECC a levelled, safe and clean site. UBB are entirely responsible for the demolition of the plant. Their estimation is that it'll take about 18 months or so once it starts in autumn, and therefore, assuming that process is followed to the project plan, in about Easter of 2024, then the PFI contract will finally be terminated between the parties, the building will be demolished, and the level site will be returned back to ECC. Please, here's my last slide that we have here. Really, it's just looking forward here. It's back to some of those 2 points about the future of the site and about the future Essex Way strategy. Really topics for future place scrutiny meetings. But what we identify in here is there are 4 key steps there to go through. There's, as I said, the demolition, which is due to start in autumn, conducted by UBB and their contractors. Their estimation, but it's estimated that about 95% of the main waste arisings from the demolition process will either be reused or recycled. We're talking there just about a permit and another stakeholder here, the Environment Agency. As with any big waste operation, and I think probably all waste operations, they are required to get a permit, an environmental permit from the Environment Agency, entirely separate to Essex County Council. They duly secured the permit. They wouldn't have been able to operate the plant without it. But that permit, because the plant is no longer going to be there and the operation will no longer be there, needs to be surrendered, given back to the Environment Agency. That will be done in a structured way, and the Environment Agency, of course, will be looking at UBB to make sure that that is given back in an appropriate manner and all operations have been ceased appropriately. The sponsors that sit behind the UBB entity, so Abasa and Balfour Beatty, they provide an unlimited guarantee and indemnity of performance. That's kicked in from the moment that the amendment and settlement agreement was signed. And that guarantee and indemnity of performance will continue 3 years after handback. So at the point that all matters have been dealt with and all environmental conditions, if there are any, have been addressed, then that continues to be in place for 3 years. So I don't personally expect there to be any, but if there are any issues for up to 3 years after handback, then that's entirely for UBB's account. And then once we have the site back in use, then what ECC wishes to do with that future, with the site in the future, can be determined at that point in time. Now, unfortunately, because of the failure of this project, our residual waste was due to be treated for a number of years more at the NBT, and of course that's not the case. We have got contracts in place at this point in time, which unfortunately is landfill, as you'll be aware. Those contracts expire come March 2024, and therefore it's important that we put in place a new medium-term strategy. This is not the long-term strategy. That will be determined after Essex residents have a chance to have their say with the new waste strategy. This is about medium-term, so it'll be around a minimum of a 7-year contract, and that's been scoped at the moment and will be out to procurement probably in the next month or so. If you cast your line back to, I think it was the May Cabinet date, then the commencement of that procurement was discussed in length at the Cabinet. And then just the final box on there about the new Essex Waste Strategy. So what was the Joint Waste Management Strategy? Just trying to reduce that acronym there, the Essex Waste Strategy, but effectively the same statutory requirement. We know that the current strategy is out of date. It's very much embedded around the waste hierarchy, and as I said at the top of the meeting, that hasn't changed at all, those principles that the ECC adheres to. But it needs to align, of course, with the new Environment Act. And I say new because the Environment Bill has been passing through Parliament, for a number of months, if not years now, but only reached royal assent relatively recently, I think in the last 6 to 9 months. So undoubtedly to make sure that ECC and the waste collection authorities as well are fully behind the Environment Act, then it's important to have a look at that strategy, to refresh that strategy and to make sure that is still current. There'll be a full consultation on that in due course at some point in the future, and of course interested stakeholders and the people of Essex will have the chance to have their say and to comment upon the strategy. So Chairman, thank you for the time. That's all I wish to say on the presentation.
Thank you, Jim. To introduce any comments from your other officers or from Bob Manley?
Well, just to say that, as you rightly said, it's a thoroughly comprehensive presentation from Jim, and that's very welcome. And I know we've got Alex in the meeting, Alex Creasy in the meeting as well, who can tell you exactly how all these things work, which is probably beyond many of us. I just wanted to add a couple of points, really. I mentioned right at the beginning about the waste strategy, and some discussions on that have already begun jointly between ourselves and the collection authorities, the city district and borough councils. So they are discussions which are ongoing. Before that comes to a conclusion, I do want that to come before this committee to have thorough interrogation and to make sure that we've taken into account the various views that I'm sure will be expressed. The other point I wanted to make, and Jim mentioned about the legal side of things, and right from the very start, we've employed Slaughter and May, who are, if not the leading firm in the country for legal matters, are certainly one of the top 2 or 3. And I think that their advice through this has been absolutely essential. So I would just like to place on record their appreciation of what they have done, because their support, we would have struggled to deal with all these legal issues. So I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm sure, as will the officers, as appropriate. Thank you, Chairman.
And would you rather the questions came to you first, Malcolm, and then you decided who should deal with it?
I'm happy to do that, or I'm happy to leave you to direct if you think appropriate, Chairman.
Okay. Well, just to tell the listeners and other people, we had a pre-meeting, obviously, as you'd imagine, to discuss the thoughts that concern some of us. And we come up with sort of a bit of a structure so that we don't zap around all over the place. So the things that we would like to discuss are the procurement, the identification of the problem at the time. There's a strange issue about asbestos, obviously consequences. We're talking about the future of the site, lessons learnt, and then eventually, of course, some sort of new waste strategy, many of which have been covered in part by Jim's presentation. So, round the table, who can I ask who would like to speak? I've got 1, I've got 2, I've got 3. More down here, side, over here. That's right. Okay. Well, in no particular order of importance, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chairman. I hoped it was going to come out in your presentation, Jim. I have visited this plant. I've never seen so many flies in one place, luckily behind glass, and so many strange things that people put in their black waste bins. You know, enormous chunks of metal and other stuff that sort of were taken out before they ever got into the plant. But can you give most members, because most members will never have been there, an idea of the size of this thing? Because presentations, they tell us where we got to and why we got to, and in fact it failed. You're not giving us a concept of how big it is. You know, how many times bigger than this room is this plant?
I can pass to Alex for this one.
Okay, thank you. The site, the building itself and the surrounding access roads occupies an area of land of about 8.5 hectares. So it's a significant facility. The biohalls, which were referenced in the presentation, were there are 3 of them, and each of those approximately 150 metres long by about 50 metres wide. And that's just the biological step. There were 4 parts to the treatment process, including a pre-processing module, which was maybe a third or so the size or half the size of the biohalls, air treatment systems, water treatment systems, and a refining module to remove the hard particles, things like glass, stones, and broken brick. So it was a significant facility. Yes, it is a significant facility.
Thank you. And that just gives a bit more context as why it's going to take so long to demolish it and clean up the site. Just the members' interest. Thank you.
May I just come in on the fly issue?
Please do, Malcolm.
Yeah. Like Councillor Barker, I had visited this site on a number of occasions, and also during the time when I was working, I visited a number of other sites run by other organisations and other companies, both inside the county and there. And certainly the food waste is what actually generates the flies. And people perceive that when they use their residual bags, that everything that goes in there, tin cans and the like, is not food waste. Unfortunately, if we don't clean the cans around a bit, the flies get in there, and apparently the worst culprit, as a dog owner, I suppose I'm amongst them, is dog food tins and cat food tins, where people don't rinse the flies get in, they come out. And in this particular instance, there were some serious issues at the start. As many of you will know, there's a traveller site very close to this facility, and they did have some major problems at the start, which I got involved with, and I'm glad to say that they were substantially reduced as a result of things like negative air pressure and that. But perhaps your members, when they talk to the public about these sites, could emphasise that trying to put clean waste into the residual waste stream, if you must have a residual waste stream, is actually going to make the environment much more pleasant for those that work in it, and even more important for those that live and work in that particular area.
Thank you for that, Malcolm. The number one question at our pre-meeting was along the lines of, do you believe the procurement process undertaken back in 2012 was robust enough at that time? Were proper tests carried out?
The only answer I can give to that, and I'm sure the officers will be able to add some more technical side to that, is that I know that a lot of research was undertaken, and a number of people, including members and officers from a number of authorities, did actually go out to Barcelona and visit an Urbasa plant to see how it functioned. Whether the waste stream is different in Spain compared to the UK, I suspect it probably is. The plants out there appeared to be doing the job that they were designed to do. But the advice that was undertaken over here was undertaken, as I understand it, by independent consultants that advised the council. But I don't know whether Mr. Creasy or Mr. Aldridge can actually refine that a little bit more.
I can certainly build on that, Councillor. I think as we answer this question, what's just worth being clear, of course, though, is that we have a High Court decision which identifies that the failure of this plant was UBB's fault and not the fault of Essex County Council. Undoubtedly, though, there was a procurement that was followed there. And I just really reaffirm some of the points I raised earlier, is I am comfortable with those officers who followed the procurement process, that it was a process which was followed with due diligence. It used the standard contract as identified that was required for PFI. It followed all of the public contract regulations, the PCR, and was fully supported by external advisors along the process as well. So I'm comfortable with the way that the manner in which the procurement was undertaken. Alex, is there anything you'd like to add?
If I may. I believe the procurement process was a very thorough one. We received outline solutions from 7 organisations, which were reduced down in a procurement process that lasted around 2 years, down to 2 companies and the eventual selection of Urbasa Balfour Beatty. During that procurement process, we were constantly making checks, clarification checks on the designs and the proposals and the claims of the contractors. All of the bids were thoroughly evaluated, and to assist us in that process, because some of this is very specialist waste treatment technology, we employed some technical advisors, Ricardo, AEA. A requirement of the DEFRA funding was that we prepared an outline business case and a final business case. And within that, we needed to secure a letter of endorsement from the technical advisors, which we did. So they looked very closely at the design information, and they raised no significant concerns with those designs. The due diligence went further than that. There was also due diligence carried out by the sponsors and by the funders, so the banks themselves employed their own technical advisors to make checks, as you would expect, because they have money at risk. And DEFRA themselves employed a number of waste specialists who looked closely at the project. So they also carried out checks. Ultimately, we relied on the recommendations of our consultants, and we entered the contract on the basis and understanding that we believed that this facility would perform as Urbasa Balfour Beatty claimed it would. but it's regrettable that they made a number of serious design errors, as Mr. Aldridge has explained, and that led to the failure of the project.
Before I go into the general questions here, has anybody else got any specific questions about the procurement process at the start? Councillor Pond.
Yes, I was a member of the Place Committee during the procurement phase, and although it was overseen as well by the Corporate Committee at the time, I do remember doubts being expressed, but then doubts are always expressed on a process of such complexity. And I certainly remember due account being taken of the reports of technical advisors who were much more specialists than any group of members could be. And I think the green light was given to the project in an entirely appropriate way. I, for one, had no qualms about the design of it and the likely success of it. So I was particularly sad to see that it had failed. How can we guard in the future against the sort of design defects being drawn into the project, a project like this, which escaped, as far as I can see, the attention of our technical advisors? I seem to remember one member saying at the time that they thought that the procurement, the build of the plant was perhaps being done on the cheap. And I sense that on the cheap means with due economy. I don't think there was anything, as far as I could see, that was objectionable. But that is obviously a caution that we've got to build into any future contract we may enter into. And that's something I'd welcome your comments on.
If I commence then, and I'll pass to Alex as a technical advisor. I think just right in is the fault was found here to be UBB.
Yeah.
They were entirely responsible for the design, build, and construction of that plant. It's also just worth looking at this in the context as well around the country where there have been issues with similar technology with NBT, and we see that with the likes of Manchester and also with Lancashire as well. So undoubtedly, on this scale, there has been issues in the UK with NBT, and we'll certainly be mindful of that forward. Alex, are there any specific further points you'd wish to respond to?
If I could, Councillor Pond, on the future, how can we guard against the future defects issue? It is a challenging area because I believe the due diligence is a balancing act between the cost of due diligence and also the speed at which it can occur. And, as with all infrastructure projects, there's a desire to complete them. I think we could look carefully before taking any future technology risks, bearing in mind we want innovation, we want to push the boundaries, but we should look carefully at our appetite for future technology risk in making any future infrastructure choices or selections. I think the structure of the contract in this instance actually protected us. What we did was we entered a contract that transferred the technology risk to the contractor. So by that I mean they had to design it, they had to build it, and they had to commission it and prove it could achieve some quite demanding performance standards. And it was only if those performance standards were achieved that they could enter the services period and receive the full unitary charge, the full payment for the treatment of the waste. And while they were in the commissioning period, they would only get a partial payment for the waste treatment. The County Council never paid for the construction of the building, and the features there and the contract protections meant that when Abasa Alphabeti regrettably made those design errors, that those problems didn't come back to the County Council, that they remained with those organisation or the special purpose vehicle. And so there was a degree of protection there for the County Council, and I think we should look carefully at using those sorts of structures in the future, as they have served us well, we believe, in this case. But we're always open to different contract structures, and we would look at, again at a full range of options if we were to go to market for something similar.
I think Councillor Buckley, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just covered a number of points that I wanted to raise, but I think one of the strengths has been the strength of the legal advice and the contracts, and that's something we must build upon. But ultimately, until we get rid of residual waste, it has to be dealt with. Whatever means we come up against, we don't want to carry on with landfill, and in fact the government is saying that post 2035 we can't. It's ECC policy to end landfill by 2030. So landfill is not a long-term option. It may be an intermediate option for us, but it is certainly not a long-term answer. There are new technologies coming on stream. My concern is to ensure that any new technology that we do work with is one that can demonstrate its success with our waste stream. Ultimately, the best answer though is to go back to the waste hierarchy, which Jim introduced right at the beginning of the slides, and reduce the waste in the first place. And that is something that we will be working on very diligently. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Pond, are you comfortable with that answer?
Yes, I have a couple more questions on the wider issues rather than just procurement, but I do think that the procurement exercise from the county's point of view was dealt with as well as it could be, and it was certainly surveyed by your committee's predecessors critically, shall we say, when the plant was being built.
I think I've got Councillor Gadd next, and then Councillor McGovern, and then we'll come back to you, Councillor Pond. So, Councillor Gadd.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you think in terms of the narrow question of procurement, etc., I think you probably did all you could, and actually reading through the presentation in the agenda, I think you actually came up with an extremely good legal result, given the kind of disastrous situation that was potentially there. I think the mistakes, or the initial mistake, I think, was going for the MBT in the first place, which I think was always likely to be a huge white elephant from my perspective. I think PFI contracts are awful because obviously they transfer all the risk to the user and away from the funders. And actually, I think if you reading through the narrative that's in the agenda, I think given the difficulty of extracting money under a PFI from the sponsors and the lenders, I think you've done extremely well actually to do what you've done. So I think the fault was in the MBT itself. You talked initially about the waste hierarchy, and the problem is with the MBT is it entirely focuses on level 4 disposal, and actually at the cost of recovery and waste and reduction, recovery and recycling. I did want to pick up on a couple of things that you talked about on the recycling levels, etc. So do those as part of this, or would you rather stick to?
I think we've unless Councillor McGovern has got a question specifically about procurement, I think
it does touch on procurement.
It does. Do you mind if we just continue that theme then? Okay, Councillor McGovern.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the report, albeit something of a tale of woe. Councillor Pond has touched on a few of the points I was going to raise, so I won't repeat them. But in terms of procurement, and I think the main thing, again, which Councillor Pond touched on, which has been kind of dealt with, is going forward that we learn from the issues of the past in this particular case. But what I find a bit troubling, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that what you're saying is in terms of procurement, everything that could be done at the time was done, and therefore all the fault was on the part of the contractor, and there's basically nothing, we couldn't really have envisaged that. If that's the case, the troubling thing from my point of view and from our point of view is surely that means that whatever waste strategy we pursue going forward, whatever technology we use, exactly the same thing could happen again, because we could follow all the correct procurement issues, but we could find ourselves with a supplier, a contractor, with different but other issues, which means they don't deliver on their promises. Am I correct in thinking that? I've got a couple of other issues, but they're separate.
I get the sense of your argument, and this is undoubtedly something that officers, and administration need to be mindful of as we go forward from there. I think there have been lessons learned about the MBT technology, and as I said, where there have been issues with other PFIs, then we've seen that a lot with MBT in other parts of the country. And again, here is absolutely critical that we focus on waste reduction, and I will just bring the conversation back to that point in time from there. In the fact of, I think, as I've said, I think in my presentation, residual waste, leftover waste throughout my lifetime, we won't achieve that zero waste objective, but there's no reason why we shouldn't chase it. And therefore, that's the only waste to recover, that small element of energy, from the, to recover the energy from that small element of residual waste is why those plants need to be there. And if we have our focus on waste reduction and we continue to look higher up the waste hierarchy, then that's, I think, the way that we should go. But again, of course, if we do get to this point, of looking, at some other form of procurement, and there's just simply no decisions taken on that at this point, then looking at technologies, tried and tested technologies, we need to have a look at as well.
So just one very quick point. Do I take it from that then that this council will not be looking at MBTs in the future?
I don't think there's any decisions that have been taken on that. Personally, I'd be surprised, but I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add, Malcolm.
Well, I think, like you, legally we can't rule out any options. However, I would be very reluctant to retrace our old footsteps where they took us down the wrong paths.
Are you comfortable with that as an answer?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll come back to Councillor Gadd with your points, and then come back to yourself, Councillor Gadd.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the slides. When you did the summary of the 2007 waste strategy, you said that the recycling target, and that was 50%. Well, actually, it's 60%. And if I quote from paragraph 4.4 of that, it says, the Essex Waste Partnership will work together to deliver high recycling that exceeds the national targets with an aspiration of collectively hitting 60% recycling by 2020. And if you look at the 2007 contract, at that time, Uttlesford district was 54% recycling, which is higher than where Essex is now 15 years later. So the history, well, my understanding is the history of plants like MBTs and incinerators and large-scale plants is that the focus becomes on disposal, and actually everyone loses focus on waste reduction, recycling, etc., which I would suggest is one reason why Essex recycling performance is not great, but maybe to use those words. So I think there should be, and that's why I think the MBT was always going to be a white elephant. So I would hope that the strategy that's under process at the moment would actually prioritise the waste hierarchy, whereas I think in the past, I think the 2007 one, I think basically ignored the waste hierarchy and just focused entirely on disposal. The question I'd like to ask in the context of that is obviously there's various comments that have been made essentially saying that energy from waste is good and landfill is bad. Now, my understanding is that whatever you burn from waste has a high carbon content, and if you burnt natural gas, you'd produce far less CO2 than by burning the waste. The best thing you can do with waste is bury it, the landfill, under sensible landfill and recoup the methane that comes off it. And that burning waste is always a bad option from a climate change perspective. And I've seen various Essex documents basically essentially saying that energy from waste is good in climate change terms compared to landfill. I don't think that's true, but I'd just like you to maybe I could just ask your comments on that.
No problem at all. So I think two questions in there. The more technical one, I'll of course defer to Alex there as our Chief Technical Officer to answer the question for you. And he may wish to build on my answer around the more general one as well. We're talking a lot around the waste hierarchy, and I'm really pleased that we are. And I was really keen that I had that, early in my slide. So we've continued to we've generated a conversation around the waste hierarchy and the 4 Rs, and I just hope that we continue to do that. And it's certainly right that we do so. I would say it was at the heart of the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy, and it will be at the heart of any future Essex Waste Strategy when that's formed. I think, however, my personal opinion is I think there is a place for recovery in waste management. I think if it's done incorrectly, yes, it can be to the deficit of the 3 R's higher up the waste hierarchy, but appropriately, whilst we still have residual waste, and I think it is something that we need to look at. We approach it in the right way. We learn the lessons that we've already identified, but there is a place for recovery within the waste management for as long as residual waste is around. Alex, can you build on that, please, and answer the technical questions?
Certainly. Thank you. So to address your question, Councillor Gadd, about point about the recycling rate in the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy, you're right that there was an aspirational target to achieve 60%. The core commitment was to achieve at least 50% by 2020, because that was actually a government target at the time. That target was met and exceeded, and we aspired to achieve 60 and always to go beyond. But at 2020, that hadn't been achieved. As Jim has said about the waste hierarchy, the 2007-8 strategy did have a strong focus on hierarchy. We know as waste managers that it's the best thing to do is to avoid the waste in the first place. We have a team of people who work in that space, trying to encourage people to not produce the waste in the first place, and if they do, to recycle or reuse them. And then finally, your question or point around energy from waste versus landfill. I mean, this is a very complicated area of waste management. There are recent reports written by consultants that look specifically at the climate emissions of energy from waste compared to landfill. And I think the situation in the UK is that the balance is very fine. It's very close in terms of climate change emissions from those two techniques. But that is a statement, or those are statements that I've seen made across a current mixture of energy from waste facilities in the UK, many of which, there are about 54 operational facilities, only about 9 of those recover heat. And when there's more heat recovery, and in the future we hope things like carbon capture and storage, then energy from waste is likely to outperform landfill solutions. Over time, there will be more changes to the energy mix, so the grid contains more and more renewable power, which is excellent. It is the future. As we decarbonise the electricity grid, then the displaced energy, or the energy produced from an energy from waste plant, becomes less and less useful. And as you rightly point out, there are fossil carbon materials in our waste, plastics, and etc. And if they're burnt, they will immediately release carbon dioxide. So anything we did in this space in the future must look at techniques to mitigate that emissions. And as part of the future waste strategy development work, we'll be looking very closely to see what the climate change impacts of various waste management options will be, to make sure that we pick the right ones that really minimise and improve on our climate emissions, because this is a really pressing issue. We haven't taken any choices about the future. The strategy development is at a very early stage, and we have a completely open mind about the selection of the right way forward.
Councillor Buckley, you raised your hand.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of brief points. We are obviously looking at what else is going on in the country, and indeed, by the racecourse, there's recently been given consent for a pyrolysis facility to deal with waste. Nothing to do with the county council whatsoever, but it's certainly something we'll be looking at with interest to see what it can process, how it can process it, is it efficient? But we are also very much around the issue of controlling emissions within the county, and Councillor Bentley mentions that, I think, at pretty much every speech that he makes around climate change and the impact that we're having. And just on the aspect of that landfill, it's been the solution for probably 120 years in this area of Southern Essex where I live, and I know Councillor McCarran is very well aware of issues down at Pitsea, which I'm not sure if they come into his constituency or the adjacent one, but down at Pitsea, landfill has been going on for in excess of 100 years. And the problem is that when those sites are full up, what do you do with them? And they are pretty useless for many activities. So what you're actually doing is taking land out of commission. If you go on a large scale plan to deal with waste through landfill, the only answer, as was said previously, is look at the waste hierarchy and reduce the volume. Then whatever methodology you use to dispose of your residual waste, you need far less of it. And I visited a number of different facilities around the country and around the county, and just so happens it might interest the committee to know, some of us did visit an energy from waste site down in Kent a few weeks ago now. It was actually quite interesting. It didn't appear on the sat-nav when we were trying to find it, but there were enormous clouds of steam coming up from the facility. So we said, let's head for that. That must be it, mustn't it? When we got there, it wasn't. It was actually a plant next door to the site which was emitting nothing. So yeah, I'm not a chemist. I can't predict anything about what they can or cannot control, but it certainly did seem that was a lot cleaner than the factory next door to it. So I keep an open mind on all of these various technologies, and I hope that having learnt from the past, we will make sure that the decision we make at the end of the waste strategy process is the one that won't just deliver for my generation, it will deliver for future generations as well.
Councillor Gadd, are you happy with that?
Yeah, could I just ask a couple of supplementaries?
Do you mind if I just cut you short for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. Councillor McGovern.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as Councillor Buckley alluded to, I have the good fortune to represent Pitsea Division. I think one of the things that I think it's incumbent on me to say is that I do feel the council actually owes the people of the Burnt Mills area of Pitsea an apology. They have had to put up with an awful lot in recent years, both during the building of the site, the period where it was attempting to hit its targets and failing miserably. There was huge disruption during all that period, and for the next couple of years, let's be honest, there's also going to be significant disruption because of the demolition of the site. On top of that, there's also the confusion about what will happen next, the very real concern and worry about that, and I certainly hope that the council will be doing everything within its power to consult properly with the people of Pitsea, particularly that part of Pitsea, so that they are fully informed of their feelings are fully taken on board, and also, importantly, going forward, that the lessons are learned from this site, not the failure of this site, but the fact that putting a site like this so close to a major residential development does not work and must not be countenanced again. Thank you.
Can I just add to what Councillor McGovern said, that, and just to let him know that the community liaison group is due to start up again fairly shortly, and I have no doubt that Councillor McGovern, as well as some of the local residents, will be invited to participate in that, and I think that is something that he will find helpful. So hopefully with assistance soon.
Just building on that, I hear your views, and I take those certainly on board, Councillor. Just building on what Malcolm said, so that community liaison group will be up and running again in the next month or so, but before there is any major activity on site. As UBB are responsible for the demolition of that facility, then it is going to be hosted by themselves on site, whilst it's possible to do so. Any interested party or local people who live in the area or work in the area will be able to attend and come and ask their questions, and it's absolutely right that the local people do put their questions to UBB and to ECC, and there'll be an opportunity to do that. As with the demolition, as with construction, there is a considerate contractor scheme, which you'll see. You see the billboards, outside. That applies equally to the demolition as well. So that needs to be adhered to. And they're just in views going forward. Yes, absolutely. The people of the Pitsea area, in the same way as the people of Essex, their views will be fully consulted upon, and people can have their say as and when the new Essex Waste Strategy is consulted on at some point in the future.
Okay, thank you. A question that's been posed to me is about asbestos. In the report, which I thought was excellent, by the way, the council appeared to lose one of the battles, if I can say, and it was shown as a relatively minor issue. In the big scheme of things, I guess, but £745,000 is my understanding that UBB were awarded that against the council. Can you just explain A, what that was, and B, why it won't happen again?
Not at all. Why don't you kick off and then perhaps I'll build on your answer if needed.
Chairman, if I may. So the asbestos issue was one that came up when samples were taken from within the facility of the dust. Those samples showed what we thought may be asbestos fibres. They were fibres with some of the physical properties of asbestos. We say the morphology, the length to width ratio of those fibres. And we acted as officers with caution, because there are district and borough and city workers that go into the facility to tip waste, as there are also county council or contractor employees that would go in to use the tipping hall. And we acted cautiously when we found out that information. Further samples were later taken and subjected to more detailed analysis, and they were confirmed not to be asbestos fibres. And I believe, well, you've read the judgment. So in the period that ensued, the facility couldn't receive waste because we were being cautious. We didn't want anyone to be inadvertently exposed to asbestos fibres. And through that caution, there was a suspension in the operations, which Justice Pepperell then took account of in his judgment and the award of the outcome.
So the fine, if you're going to call it that, was not for because we'd submitted dirty waste with asbestos in it. It was because we suspended the contract for a period of time without.
It was there were no deliveries during the period when this was happening because we were exercising caution. We never instructed anyone to stop deliveries, but various parties decided, while there was an uncertainty, not to enter the plant, and that gave rise to a loss of revenue, I think, for the contractor, which was what they were claiming.
And that was a successful claim.
That element was, yes. There was a big award, but a small award in the context of the numbers that we discussed, which was made against DCC. So for just that one element of the claim was awarded in favour of UBB. From that perspective, though, I think it was a balance there that was undertaken at the time against health and safety, or a view of a health and safety issue against a contractual issue. And then, as always, the hands and safety issue, wins hands down. But unfortunately, as a result of that, we did walk into a contractual issue, which was recognised by the judge. If we had our time again, I would take the same decision.
Thanks for your answer. I'm mindful of winding up because we've got another issue. So, Councillor Gadd.
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just coming back on the sort of 50-60% target, I was concerned you saying that actually it was a 50% target in 2007. So just first question is, what's the current recycling charge? And the second was just coming back on the burning of the waste, energy from waste. And obviously energy from waste and landfill are both bad options. But to me, waste is high carbon compared to methane as the lowest carbon alternative. I don't see how it can ever be a good option in terms of climate change and CO2 production if you ignore renewable credits, which are sort of fictional, aren't they, in this context. So maybe if you could just give us a couple of, a minute or two, I'm conscious of time, but maybe a more detailed presentation some other time would be useful to understand, because on the surface it just doesn't make any sense how waste can ever be a better, burning waste can ever be a better option.
I think it's definitely one that we need to take away, and it's if the time constraint here, I think it's a bigger conversation from there. You talk about energy from waste, though, and then I'll pass over to Alex if there's any other comments he wants to add. With regards to the future of the treatment of residual waste, there simply hasn't been any decisions taken at this point in time about how residual waste will be treated in the long term. And that will be very much subject of a consultation, as I've said, with people of Essex having a chance to have their say. So it's just worth being very clear and unequivocal about that particular point.
Thank you. Councillor Siddle, you've read. Oh, sorry, Alex, sorry.
Are there any of those you wish to take?
Just if I could just try and clarify for Councillor Gadd about the current recycling target. The strategy only set targets out to 2020, which is another reason why we need either to refresh the existing strategy or create a new strategy, because we need to continue to stretch ourselves. And, we will always, as waste officers, try and move waste up the hierarchy further. That is why we're here. We want to improve the environment for people, in a cost-effective way. So we need a new strategy.
Councillor Siddle?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my background is in plastics and to a large extent recycling plastics. And just picking up on what Councillor Gadd mentioned, the energy from waste option, if you like. I did visit the Invida plant presentation at Rivenall. And they very much see the waste as not being a waste but a resource, which I found quite interesting. And absolutely this hierarchy of waste management, we do want to reduce the waste to zero, but that will take some time. So there's an interim period as far as I can see. And I would like to see that the council is looking at all of the costs involved, because the vast majority of boilers in the rural area are oil-fired boilers. And that's not going to change quickly. If you heat plastic to 400 degrees, it goes back to oil. We borrow the oil and turn it into a plastic. So there is an argument, I think, that oil burnt in an oil-fired boiler at home is very much more worse for the environment than to burn it in a clean way in a energy from waste plant. And I think it's that balance you need to look at as well. I think the proposed site at Rivenall will generate electricity for 66,000 homes, which is interesting. That means that potentially it could remove 66,000 homes burning oil in a very dirty way. So it's just that point I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Siddle. Just on your comment regarding the domestic oil boilers and their emissions compared to energy from waste facilities, I think it's true that, there are very little emissions laws and restrictions on oil-fired boilers at domestic level, whereas energy from waste facilities, if they're burning plastics, they have to comply with what was the Waste Incineration Directive and now the Industrial Emissions Directive, which is one of the most stringent pieces of environmental legislation that I know of as a waste manager. And so, yes, it's likely that the emissions will be more tightly controlled, and that is an interesting observation. But
well, I'd like to see that brought in the mix. I think that's an important. Councillor Gadd is quite right in saying, any burning of a waste is bad for the environment, but it is offset to a large extent. We're talking about people using heat pumps, for example, air source heat pumps, which are fueled by electricity. You can generate electricity from energy from waste plant, and then heat homes from ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps. Then that's got to be a benefit in the interim until we get these residual waste to zero, which I would suggest will be several decades. So it's important, I think, to measure everything around it, not just to take one item and say that's a bad thing because we're burning this waste. It is a resource that we're ignoring, and thin film plastics are particularly difficult to dispose of. And I'm thinking of, in terms of the farmers use thin film plastics, and what to do them afterwards is very difficult in terms of recycling. But it is to me a second use of that plastic waste, which can be incinerated probably in a clean way and generate energy which could fuel houses. So if the Rivenall plant or the specifications were given, 66,000 homes. Enough electricity to power 66,000 homes, which is significant. So we need to weigh up all those things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just I think this whole topic is a very complicated one. It's a really important one, the choice over whether we should be burning or burying waste or even doing something else with it after we've recycled and recovered, reduced all we can. And I think it really is something that we need to bring back to another session, as we've already indicated, what happened in terms of the Essex Waste Strategy work.
You're correct, thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Pond, as chairman of corporate, as it's a joint meeting, is there anything you want to finalise with?
I've heard a lot of interesting information. I agree with Councillor Gadd and others that we must reduce before we do any more. But I also agree with Councillor Siddle, there may be a place, perhaps as a transitional phase, for the burning of waste in a clean and controlled way. And I mention that because my own division lies in plume of the mass burn incinerator, which was built by the London Waste Authority in the mid-60s at Edmonton. And the emissions from that were grievously harmful and toxic in the early years. I believe it has been cleaned up, but I have a strong objection to the burning of waste. I think it is deleterious to the environment beyond measure. So in any future procurement, I think we have to lay down some desiderata, some ground rules, which we will not transgress. But equally, we need to be able to react quickly to new technologies. And if there's need for a transitional phase, then we need to be able to adapt to that. And that would imply, on a procurement basis, that we do not lock ourselves for too long into a hugely harmful process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think I will close there. As everybody has said and as people have mentioned, this isn't the end of the story by any means. Of course, having built our plans for the future around this plant being available and up and running and providing and performing a function, we've now got to replace that. So I'm going to ask you to come back to us, but I'd like to just one final. What's the current timetable for the adoption of the new waste strategy?
The answer to that is simply to be determined at this point in time. So there will be a full consultation that will take place, a thorough consultation with the people of Essex, but timing of that is to be determined, Councillor.
Sounds touch woolly in the nicest possible. I understand why you're saying it, yeah. But can we have anything a bit stronger than that?
I can't at this point in time. Councillor Buckley, is there anything further you'd wish to add?
Well, only in as much as to say that I would like the new waste strategy in place as early as we can. However, there are a number of hurdles to overcome before we're at a point where we can bring forward a proposal that can be adopted. But what I do want to do, as I mentioned a couple of times during the meeting, is to work with the Scrutiny Committee to help refine and hone the strategy before it is finally adopted. And on that, you have my undertaking. It will come back to you before we actually commit to that strategy.
Okay. In that case, I'm going to draw a line under there. I'd like to thank Councillor Buckley, Councillor Massey, Nicole, Jim and Alex for giving a presentation on a really touchy and edgy subject, and you've done it very professionally. The fact that the judgment went so much in our favour is a comfort for the residents of Essex. It's not, we'd rather not be here, we'd rather not be in this place. But the fact that we got the judgment, so much so. So can I thank you all? So I'm going to draw that item to a close, and I'm going to have a 2-minute break for comfort for people. But I've also got to we've got a new trial audience here, so they've got to come in and be set up. So thank you very much for your help. Thank you, and thank you, Malcolm, for attending in an unfit set of circumstances. I hope you get back very quickly.
I would prefer to have been there with you, Chairman, but for what it's worth, the technology is working far better on this meeting than it has on many of the others I've done over the last few weeks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Buckley. So a 2-minute break, please. So now we move to item 7 on the agenda in your pack. It's page 23. It's the initial response to the Local Highways Panel Task and Finish Group. And the author is Daniel McLean. And you were asked if you had any inquiries to go to Daniel. So, Daniel, can I just ask before we start, did you actually have any inquiries from members at all?
I should explain, I haven't that I'm aware of. However, I have recently just got back from some extended paternity leave.
Okay.
So there could well have been some receipts I simply haven't picked up yet. But as far as I'm aware, there haven't been.
Okay. But first of all, can I congratulate you on the maternity leave?
Thank you.
Paternity leave. So here we are at this item. This is a response from an initial request from Lee Scott way back in September 2021. And of course, this was a brand new committee in June last year. And with a brand new committee, we didn't inherit a whole load of work or tasks, and we asked around what was the most popular, perhaps even what was the most contentious issue as far as each resident was concerned. And each member came back with their views, and overwhelmingly, the subject that they wanted to discuss was highways and local highways panels. So it was very fortuitous, Councillor Scott, that you asked us to review this. So just for those who are new to the committee, and of course anybody who's watching on YouTube, that there was originally 6/7 members volunteered to be on the Task and Finish group, and it was a very, very enthusiastic group that started, and they subsequently had 6 or 7 meetings. They then presented back to the Place Committee their version, which is the Local Highways Panel I'm holding up here report. That was then brought back to Place for acceptance and approval, and I'm pleased to say it was unanimous. It was unanimous, and that was then presented at a meeting with which Councillor Scott and his team presented. So they've gone away, and as they've said, they took the report and they've presented to it, and they've responded, and hence they're here today. I think I'm going to speak boldly if I can, only because I know I have the support of Councillor Scott. Is that what we're saying here is that this is a task and finish group, but we haven't finished. This is an initial response to an initial report, and already there are meetings set up, or a meeting is going to be set up with the task and finish group after today, with the portfolio holder and his key officers. And hopefully that will be within the next month. And further to that, in September, we've reserved a slot for you to come back to pick up the things that we know couldn't be dealt with before. So I'd like to welcome to the meeting formally Councillor Lee Scott, Cabinet Member for Highways Maintenance and Sustainable Transport. Councillor Scott is known as one of the hardest working councillors in the council. Daniel McLean, who's the Highway Liaison Officer, Team Leader. Thank you, Daniel, and congratulations again. And Justin Stiles, who's the Design Manager. So, over to you, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I start by saying that your words at the start were correct? This is an initial response. This is the start, not the end. There's a number of issues I'd like to talk through, and I'm going to take them in the order that they've been sort of passed to me to look at. So I'm going to start with, if I may, the proposals which it says were rejected, and I'd just like to talk through those, if I may, first. There was a suggestion for a super panel.
We haven't explained that.
There was a proposal for a super panel. That super panel, I am suggesting, becomes a chairman's panel. The chairman of every local highways panel sit on a panel above it, thus getting over the issue of who should sit on said super panel. but that panel oversees and works with all the local highways panels that currently exist. That would enable them, that things could be passed up to them. And it comes on very much to the next point of the £50,000 cap that should be put on LHPs. The reason why we don't think putting a cap in money is the right way forward is it is up to the individual LHP. If the LHP doesn't want to make decisions above a certain value, they would have the ability to push those decisions up to a chairman's panel. But as we are in favour of devolution and having things going down, putting a cap then on what an individual panel might or might not be able to do was not thought to be the desirable way forward. So the £50,000 cap was not something we would want to take forward. There was another proposal that only county members have voting rights. I know the difficulties it may occur, but it is genuinely believed that if we do truly believe in devolution, we should involve our district colleagues in this as well, and that they should have voting rights. So the proposal is that those voting rights for district councils stand. There's a couple of ambiguities I'd like to clear up as well. I want to explain the fact of how schemes can be submitted. It was not the intention, nor is the intention, that members of the public will be able to submit schemes of their own. It would have to go through their county member, who would then put it forward to the local highways panel. And there would be a mechanism that members of the public could submit things directly to their county member, which may or may not be considered by the local highways panel as they see fit. But it is in no way suggested that members of the public could just put in requests by themselves direct to a local highways panel. It would only make things slower, make the work more difficult, and also perhaps raise expectations which could not possibly be fulfilled. So that was not the suggestion, and I just want to clear that ambiguity up. The response originally seems to be taken that it proposed that unallocated funds at the June meeting be distributed by said chairman's panel or redistributed. What I want to make clear is there are some local highways panels, in fact probably most, who have spent their money, end of story. But if there is money there, that there are not projects that have not been funded or are waiting for various reasons, design or otherwise, that money would stay there to fund those projects. But if there's an excess of money that is not allocated to a project, then that money has to go where it should be best for everyone in Essex. Now, it may be that across all the local highways panels, that doesn't occur. But should it occur, then that money would go to the chairman's panel to allocate. That is the suggestion for discussion. I think I've covered those. Right. On the budgetary questions, I can't answer those questions today. I doubt I'll be able to answer them next month. I hope to be able to, in the autumn, begin to answer them. But as we all know, the situation we find ourselves in when all of the budgets were done, including my own, obviously, was where we anticipated inflation at a far, far lower rate than we're going to end up with this summer. And I'm not going to mislead anyone, I would never do that, and say I can actually be sure where that's going to end up in the next few months. I don't know. It's as simple as that. It's something on budgeting. The budgets that are in place for the local highways panels are in place. But what I can't say is what might be at our disposal as a council generally after when we're doing the next budgeting process. I just can't predict that. So I'm not going to touch on that at all today because I don't have the answers. I'm sorry. On the issues of local highways panels are being called upon to address the safer, greener and healthier agenda, the whole council's doing that. That's part of everything that applies to every single thing that Essex County Council is doing. So it is to be built in, not as an additional item. It's almost everything we do. There should be an aspect looking at what is the priorities of the council as has been stipulated and voted on. So it's not an additional item. It's just part of everything that we're doing across the board now. The more use of delivery gains, I agree with, and we're looking into that. There's one question, if I may, Chairman, throw back, and that is a greater number of local schemes. Could that be explained to me exactly what that is meant by? Because surely the local highways panels are only really dealing with local schemes. So I don't really understand that part of it, but I'd be happy to get it looked into and answer it. It is important that we have a new member guide on local highways panels. We're in total agreement on that, and that will be put into place. And something I would like to ask, but on the issues where everyone is in agreement, I would like officers to be able to start work on those straight away. The ones that are up for discussion and we're going to take to future meetings is a different matter. But where something is agreed on, I genuinely would like to move forward to try and get those things that we're all agreed on in place. On the expansion of highways rangers' capabilities, it's something I want to look at further because there are legal implications at the moment of what they are allowed to do, what they can do, what they can't do, and I want to take all those into account. And if I may, when we meet in September, I'd like to bring that one forward there, if I may, rather than try and answer it today. A two-tier reporting system, one for the public, but more detailed for members. As part of the new systems that are coming in, I do believe that is the way forward, as you have said. There should be a detailed one for members and a less detailed one just giving the outlying items for members of the public. So yes, I'm in agreement, or we're in agreement, I should say. Gap between expectations, reality of delivery. Yeah, it is important that for our residents, for us, that we know whether something is deliverable, whether it's going to happen, and in honesty, if something is put to the local highways panel that is going to happen sometime never, that everyone's made aware of that. So we know what is going on. It is vital that that happens. And one of the issues that has been brought up is the fact of delivery capability, and I'm not referring to finances. I'm referring to the fact of we have had a number of vacancies, as has very many other local authorities, in fact, virtually every local authority across the country. We have addressed that. I believe it's one vacancy to fill currently. So hopefully we will be back up to full strength very, very shortly. But I don't want to say that that will immediately solve all our problems. It won't do, because there's a backlog of work. There's an expectation because of extra monies that we'll put in budget 2021. 21-22, that the expectation of getting back up to speed on those work, because we have had a gap, will take time. It won't happen immediately overnight. But that is something that has now, if not been fully resolved, has been more or less resolved, and hopefully will be fully resolved very shortly. Quarterly reviews of maintenance and performance, agreed. No question, nothing to say. We agree with the committee on that. There are a number of different issues that the committee raised, and they're right on them. The best way to try and tackle them, and I want to go back to where I started, and that is, why not a super LHP? Why a chairman's panel? For one, it is, we all know who the chairman of the LHPs are, and if a chairman should change, then they would take the seat on the chairman's panel. We all know that some projects come to us that you would want to send to a chairman's panel to review. There may be a number of reasons for that. That will be up to the LHP chairman whether they wish to do that or not. The other thing that I think is vital is the makeup of LHPs. The suggestion that was put forward is by the Task and Finish Group and then agreed by the committee was that it would be all Essex County councils, one district councillor and one parish councillor. We've slightly changed that and suggested that all Essex County councillors, 2 district councillors and 1 parish councillor. I do recognise that there are some double hatters, and that would mean that the makeup of committees might be different. But if we genuinely believe in devolution, I don't think reducing the number of district councils is the way to go. parish councils and their involvement. Obviously, parish councils have a vital role to play in all of our work. They're on the ground in individual, much smaller areas, and they should feed things in as well. But the proposals need to come through the county councillors. So I would say that if a parish council is coming up with a scheme, it could go on the reporting tool to go to the county councillor for their endorsement to take forward, which I think is vital as well. No one knows their own areas better than we do. And I'm not referring residents know the areas, but parish councillors do, but we should all know our own areas very, very well and know what schemes are needed and what's going to benefit the community within the resources we have. And I'm not going to pretend they're limitless resources, because they're not. So working together with our residents, working together with our parishes, we can make sure that the schemes that are going forward are the ones that are going to, for the money we have, make the most difference to our residents. What I really wanted to do today was for you to fire questions at me, which I will answer to the best of my ability, and bring into play both Daniel and Justin with any answers. But I would really, I hope I've tackled some of the ambiguities and clear those up. If there's any others that you want me to clear up, I'd be delighted to. But as the chairman quite rightly says, we are planning a meeting quite shortly, and then there will be a September meeting where we come back and say, this is where we want to go forward. What I would ask today, if it's at all possible, but where we're in total agreement, that we allow officers to start work on that, so that by September we can have something, if you like, some meat on the bone to put forward. Or for those vegetarians, no meat on the bone. Is it possible I could ask for a glass of water?
There is a jug over there. I have myself to the spare one.
Thank you. Chairman, I pass over to you for any questions that people want to fire.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask to lead on the response Mike Steele, because he's the chairman of the eventual chairman of the Task and Finish Group. He's also, everybody's seen how wonderful he was in that, so he's been promoted earlier today to the vice chairman of this group. So he's
too many compliments I'll get used to.
Yeah, he's overly excited about it. Just one thing you said about, I don't think we have the authority to say to you, you've got to put these things in. I think these are our suggestions. So if you agree with our suggestions, bearing in mind it's not all or nothing, if there are items that you say, oh, yeah, we think that's a good idea, and we agree that it's a good idea, I think that's down to your department to just get on and do it.
Okay, Chairman, I act in a pragmatic way, and although I know I can say, let's go forward and do this, I don't want to do that unless everyone is happy with what I'm doing. I'm not, I don't believe in telling everyone what they have to do. I want to work with people. So therefore, I want to take forward the items that, if not fully in agreement with, people who are easing going forward. And I think we've probably 4 or 5 of them we can take forward to start the work and mechanism going.
Okay. I'm going to hand over to Mike. And Mike is going to be brief by the very nature of the fact that he's actually due to attend his local highways panel meeting at 1 o'clock. So it's rather ironic that he'll be the very first person to
exit. Yeah.
So Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And just for the benefit of everyone else, what I actually did, it was only yesterday, to give due regard to Councillor Scott. I actually took Councillor Scott's response and compared it with our original 46-page report and did a bit of an analysis as to, and I split everything into 4 separate categories, where we were in agreement, where we weren't in agreement, where we felt that our recommendation had been misunderstood, and I think Councillor Corrie is right as well. They are recommendations; they're not, we're not trying to impose. And then there was a number that I thought we hadn't received a response to, so I did split it out by those categories. So. And there was a side conversation that says it would be useful to be able to take this forward, that the task group could take this forward with you
and work through some of these, because I hate to think something was not put in place because of a misunderstanding. If you ultimately don't think it's a good idea, then that's acceptable. But if it's a misunderstanding, it's not a good place to come to.
Agreed.
So just going down those different categories, I thought there were four recommendations that were agreed by Councillor Scott. Partially agreed or fully agreed. I think there was agreements on how the funding is allocated according to a formula which is based on roads and road lengths and population, and that should apply to all the funds and not even to any extra funds. There was agreement on that. There was agreement, a bit strong agreement, on the additional training required, and I would ask that when you derive the training, that we are part of that process, so we understand, that does hit the right spot. There was, I'm going to say, partial agreement on the membership, but it was absolutely near agreement, because we suggested, as you said, one district councillor and one parish councillor, and you said 2 + 1. So, I mean, it's not worth debating about. And then the other thing I think we were in agreement on was the importance of the casualty reduction process. And for those who, if you don't understand, at the moment, casualty reduction is something that's done by a separate team when there is a serious or a fatality in a particular area, and then the analysis will get brought back to the analysis is brought back to the particular LHP, and they say, we want to change this or do that or change these road markings. Would you agree to fund that from the LHP? And usually you've kind of got no choice, because if you say no and there's another action, you could be personally liable. The slight change there is the way that budget is now allocated, and that's already been done, in as much as instead of everybody paying what appears to be on average 14%, but you actually pay actuals. If you've got no casualty reduction schemes, then you will see no cost going to your LHP. Now we've all got to pay effectively like an insurance premium, 14%, into a central pot. So you could be a winner or a loser financially, and that's a change that's already happened. But I'll put that in the list of what we'd agreed. Those were the 4 that we've agreed on. I think the proposals that we disagreed on, and what I say have been rejected, was not so much the idea of the super panel. I understand the logic of having chairman panel, but I think we were strong on the point that we needed to attract additional funds from the Safer, Greener, Healthier. And I know that's tricky, but we thought we'd write it down anyway, because part of the problem is that certainly in my LHP, we've got lists, we've got 7 or 8 cycle schemes that we just can't do because they're too expensive. And if we do 1 or 2 cycle schemes, we can't do any other schemes. And that was also about bringing in the 50k cap too, because the problem we've got is if we do a cycle scheme, we don't do lots of local schemes, and that's what I meant by local schemes. I didn't finish the sentence off, actually. I'm sorry, but there was in my speech I didn't finish the sentence off to say what I meant was, we'd like an emphasis on more local schemes, and the 50k, 60k, 70 schemes tend to take away that distribution. But
can I just come back on that point?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we have to look at, which hasn't been something that LHPs have necessarily been doing before, is when there is a new development, number 106 money, which goes through the districts, I accept how it goes at the moment, but I believe that some of these schemes could be included by relationships from the LHPs with the districts, because district councillors will be sitting there to actually try and get the extra funding that you are discussing. Yeah. Because I'd love to say that I think funding is going to get easier, but I fear that is not the case. So it's just looking at maybe different ways of getting those money.
I recognise that methodology, because actually one of the schemes in my LHP has actually been turned away by the LHP on the basis that we're going to try and get it through an S106 agreement. So we'll do the design, but we'll get the S106 to fund it. So I know that's a mechanism. More of that would be.
I think it's important we try and bring as much monies in for our residents and to help our areas. That is just one other angle that we could try. Won't work in every case, but if you don't ask, you don't get.
I mean, on the funding, certainly when we analysed each LHP, we did find a variation, but the longest queues were the longest unfunded queues was like, well, mine was one of them. There was a 6-year queue, and that was where, and it also led to this expectation, this gap expectation between residents and what the LHP could deliver. Somebody bangs another scheme in, and it goes to the bottom of a 6-year queue, and people expect it to happen within a year, and it doesn't. It doesn't happen for several years.
You're so right. I get emails from people saying we put this scheme in, and it hasn't happened in 5 years. In fact, if we're being honest, 5 years ago we knew it wouldn't happen for 5 years, or maybe not at all. So it is making sure reality is in line with expectations.
I put 3 down as perhaps misunderstandings between us. About I think it suggests unspent in June, but I think it means unallocated funds in June because you're only part way through the year. Going to the chairman's panel, it says that we recommended that. I'm not sure we did recommend that, and I think we have some concerns about, because some funds need to be held back by an individual LHP for emergencies or other things coming in. So I think that's a debate to be had.
I think you're pushing an open door, so yeah, there won't be much debate, so that's okay.
And I thought it worth mentioning, because one of the other members mentioned the fact that one of the things that creates unspent funds is the current lack of resource. And I did say in here that even if the chairman's panel takes it, they're using the same resource at the end of the day, perhaps, and therefore they're going to, whatever's called money to be unspent could still be a problem to the chairman's panel as well. But it's just a point worth making. And then the third one was about submission of schemes by the public, which you've cleared up. And in fact, we felt very strongly we don't want masses of public putting schemes in.
Never the intention, because just being blunt would raise expectations to say we couldn't deliver. There'd be no point in it. It would just be an email or paper exercise. So no, that's not the suggestion.
We'd overburden the validation system, and it would just.
Right. That was never the suggestion.
I noted down, I thought there were 14 items that weren't answered, but I mean, perhaps I might have been very picky, but I went through the original report fully. We mentioned about the budget. We've mentioned safer, greener, healthier agenda that LHPs are kind of getting drawn into. When I first entered LHPs, I thought we were talking more about safety issues, but as we go do things more like cycling routes, we're talking more about the safer, greener, healthier agenda, which is what we meant by, is it fair for the LHP to take on that burden, but they're not getting safer, greener, healthier funds. They're only getting highway funds. And a lot of the public, to be honest, prefer safety to be priority number one rather than greener or healthy from an LHP point of view. That's a bold statement. You touched upon the more use of delivery gangs. We were convinced that delivery gangs were a lot more effective and efficient than going out to contract, and I note that I think they perform 70% of the schemes, but it's only 30% of the cost, because most of the costs are in the bigger schemes. There was things like, perhaps this comes under training, but perhaps it also comes under the new system that's going to be rolled out, which was meant to be mid 2022. But we feel members very much should be the front line, the triage of system schemes coming in, which you agree with, but that we should also be more. We should look at those schemes and only put them in if we truly support them. There's a temptation to put schemes in to get the residents off your back, but we need to be consulting the members' guides and saying no, if it doesn't meet the criteria, I won't support that scheme. Now that's a hard thing for members to do, but we felt they should be encouraged to do that.
I agree with you that it is a hard thing to do. I say that from a member's point of view myself in my own division, but nonetheless, it's something that we have to do if we're going to be frank and honest with people. And just the same, you'll see coming from the centre as well, that I will be doing that where there is a scheme which is just saying to someone, refer it to the LHP. You'll see less and less of that happening, because we're going to be it's not an easy thing to say no, but we will have to say with the resources we have, this cannot go forward.
Thank you for clarifying the issue on the two-tier reporting system. It's just that your written response didn't say that, but we want all the background information to be available to members so that we can go in and look at how long the design took, when is it planned to be implemented. So when we get questions, we've got the answer.
Absolutely.
Do I want to mention that we talked about length of scheme of queues? There is a concern about the length on some LHBs, and I think you've mentioned all the others. But I say there were 14 points we thought weren't mentioned in your response, but you've mentioned them today.
I think the only ones, as I said, I can't answer today is the budgetary ones. We know what we've got, but I can't answer budgetary until I know the situation, which I don't at this present juncture.
Well, I'll just finish by saying we, the task group, welcome the opportunity to sit down with you in the next month and go through some of our reasoning and hear your reasoning and perhaps come to a compromise.
And I think also, if I may say, Chairman, what is important, I go back to what I said at the start, that this is working together to make local highways panels the best they can possibly be and achieve the most they can possibly achieve without being unrealistic of something that we can't achieve. So yeah, it is taking things forward together, and I'm happy to meet on a regular basis on that, even after the Task and Finish group have finished. If there's a group of members through this committee that want to meet, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. To you, Mr. Chairman.
Looking round the table.
Fans.
Got that. Okay, again, no particular order. Councillor Siddle.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think the the liaison thing is really important. And as the chairman of the Braintree panel, I think that chairman's panel should be the liaison connection. Thank you. That's just that point.
Thank you.
Councillor Whitbread.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, Lee, for that presentation, and also Mike for your very comprehensive response. I actually missed the last meeting, so I wasn't there when we discussed the adoption of the report. I agree with you on the cap, actually. I think it would be quite difficult to try and limit the budget of the different schemes, because I know personally I've had some quite expensive schemes come forward and actually they'd have nowhere else to go, and I think that wouldn't be popular locally. My question is just around kind of future devolution and the ability to potentially top up schemes from the district council point of view. I know you've done the work with the speed kind of signs which parish councils can pay for, and also potential match funding as well. Is there scope for district councils potentially to top up schemes? That's my first question. I've got one more.
Holly, I can answer that very simply. Yeah. If a district council, or indeed, as is happening, as you know, with parish councils want to pay or top up, then that more money, more power to our elbow, so to speak. So yeah.
So if a district was to bring a proposal forward, you'd be very willing to listen to that?
As long as they're willing to put some money in, I'm always willing to listen to anyone who wants to put some money in.
Chairman, can I add to that?
Sorry, Daniel.
Lee, sorry. Just to say, we have had circumstances in the past where that's happened. And when I was the HLO for Brentwood, for example, we had a couple of schemes where we worked alongside Brentwood Borough Council and they were able to contribute to some schemes that otherwise wouldn't have got through. So I think, yeah, there absolutely is that ability to tap into external funds. We've also had money from the South Essex Parking Partnership to get some schemes on the ground that, again, otherwise wouldn't have done. So maybe we need to kind of formalise the process for approaching the district councils for kind of tapping into these additional funds and exploiting these opportunities. Maybe that's something that we can formalise as a members' guide. That's one of the things we could pick up as and train out to members going forward. So I think that could perhaps be something we can take away and have a discussion about and present when we next meet.
That's really helpful. And just another question for me. I think one of the difficulties I've personally experienced is in terms of getting quick responses. And I realise the officers are really busy, the schemes take a long time to process. The tracking on the website is good, but it's only got validated schemes on, and it would be useful to see all the schemes that are kind of in the pipeline and being considered, particularly from a kind of public point of view, because people will say, well, we haven't done anything, and actually it's at a stage where it's not being validated. And then also in terms of setting expectations, I think there needs to perhaps be some wording for members about a realistic timescale on different types of schemes. I think that would be really helpful. And then not a question, but a comment. Personally, I would have no parish councillors rather than the one, but that was probably controversial. I just think it's hard to pick who you'd put on there. And actually, we should be liaising directly with our parishes all the time anyway. But,
Okay, although the last one wasn't a question, I'll let you tell them that. I think part of the members' guides that we're going to be doing and the online stuff will cover most of the points you've just raised, Holly. So I genuinely think so. And Chairman, apologies for using first names, but you know I don't do formality that well, so I'm happy for anyone to call me by my first name. I've been called far worse. Thank you.
Very kind of you, Daphne.
So may I add to that point as well, just quickly? Sorry. With regard to the new online system that we're putting together, it's got a number of elements. It'll be the reporting element and the tracking, and that will include a map that shows everything that's been submitted. It'll be colour-coded, so you can see if it's awaiting validation, if it's being funded, if it isn't feasible. Now, this is still being put together. We want to make sure it's right and it's fit for purpose. But what I'm hoping to do is when we meet next, I can probably show you kind of where we are with that programme, what it's going to look like, how it will work, and then you can feed into that and you can start to and shape it. But it absolutely will give members of the public a much clearer overview as to where their schemes are and members, obviously.
Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Just 2 points.
Just to add, sorry, Councillor Vance was a key part of the local highways planning task and finish group. Very key.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just a couple of points, if I may. One to note and one a question. With regard to the actual budgets that's allocated, I just need some sort of clarity, if I may. The council set a target of a base budget plus £200,000 going forward for the next 3 years. Can we confirm, or can you confirm for me today that that is how it will be going forward, or is it the intention, because I believe there is some thoughts by some of the other members that £200,000 will be allocated and a total budget, and that will be allocated as per the formula, not including the 200,000. So just to put that simply, will we stick with what we've got, a base plus 200,000 for the next 3 years, or will the 200,000 be lumped in into a total budget and the formula be used?
It's a very good question. I only wish I had a very good answer. To the best of my knowledge. Go on, God.
So for this current financial year, the monies were allocated across the piece with the additional 200,000 to each panel. And those monies will remain with the panels. A lot of them have allocated those funds, a lot haven't, but this financial year will remain as it is. In the coming financial year, if that money obviously is available, it proposes that it would be distributed to the panels, so that the lump sum, as it all is, will be distributed using the formula.
Okay, just for clarity, because again, I'm not absolutely sure you're giving me my answer. There is a budget of £6 million. That £6 million at the moment uses a formula to create a base amount. In addition to that, there is £200,000. Next year and going forward, is it the case that £6 million will be, if that were the budget, £6 million will use the formula only and allocate as per the formula, not a base amount plus 200,000?
If I can come in and say that will be one of the discussion points. But what if, in answer to your question, is the money in place? The money is in place.
Yeah, I understand the money is in place. It was just that I think some members of the Task and Finish group believe that going forward, the total budget will be allocated by the formula and £200,000 won't be applied. It will be in there, but it won't be two separate entities. It'll be just one total amount allocated by the formula.
Rather than try and do something on the hoof, I will come back to you.
Okay. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, my understanding of your response is that all budgets going forward, whether I mean, it was slightly unusual to get a top-up budget, and the top-up was flatly distributed last year, I think. But my understanding of your response was whatever budget's available will be allocated according to the formula of road lengths and population and so on. And if some more money comes available during the year, yes. So it does say that.
It actually said in two.
You're correct.
Yeah. So if any money comes available it again will
After this year.
will be allocated according to the formula, not a flat amount. And I'd go even further. You didn't mention the dampening, and I don't know if you know what dampening is, but that's part of the formula as well. But that was what's on my list of things you didn't mention.
That is.
Yeah.
That is.
I got the impression, and I think Marshall's trying to clarify that all monies will follow the formula, because the problem was that when it was 200k to each LHP, whilst 200k was a small percentage to Chelmsford or Colchester, it was a large percentage to somewhere else, and so we're saying it ought to follow the formula. And I thought you'd accepted that recommendation.
Yeah, I've just been advised that is correct.
Can we therefore take that forward for discussions going forward as well? Because I'm still not sure, because the councils have agreed that the way it's allocated at the moment will be the way it's allocated for the next 3 years. And I pick up the point.
I think one of the ambiguities is there are legal aspects I have to check before that comes in. Because the announcement of this money was made budget not last year, the year before, I believe.
And just the other one, that I just wanted to make a point. Mike has just been talking about, it was totally agreed, there were some dissenting issues around the report that we've come back to you with. My thoughts about, I just want to make it clear that I don't wholly endorse the idea of safety critical schemes money being put into a central pot and dealt with by some central body that we don't know. I would have still preferred that safety critical schemes allocation still remain part of every LHP's.
Okay, I can answer that one, Marshall, because it was agreed by it wasn't part of this review, it was agreed way before it, at a meeting held with LHP chairman, and it went through. So that's not part of this.
I just hope, and I bring it to the attention that I hope all LHP panels realise that of their total budget, some 14% is going to be immediately filtered off of that top and put into a central fund. I just hope they all realise that.
Every chairman was involved, and that happened, if I'm not mistaken, a number of months ago. So
it's just a point I make. It's just something I personally don't endorse, but if it's been agreed, it's been agreed.
Councillor Scordis.
Thank you. So my question is in regard to the committee above a committee, the chairman's committee, and what kind of purpose it would have. My biggest fear is, are we putting too much bureaucracy in? Or would they play the role of firstly sharing best practice, but also maybe arguing for more funding for their borough district, for example, halfway through the year saying you have an underspend, we have too many applications. Do we change budgets that way? Or does it have a completely different function that we're imagining?
I think it's fair to say that it's certainly not about putting in a level of bureaucracy or putting in a level of management of LHPs. That was what concerned me about a super LHP. The chairman's panel, by nature, could have things referred to it if the LHPs are not at ease with something. It would have an element of a lobbying basis as well for exactly what you've just said. So there's a whole plethora of things for the chairman's panel, which is why I want that officers can now start working up the exact process of what it would be. But it's certainly not about trying to create bureaucracy. It's about more devolution, to be perfectly honest.
Are you happy with that, Mr. Mike?
Yeah, no follow-ups.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. Just coming back to the online reporting tool, and just a quick question about that. As we know, we get a lot of queries from residents about and I welcome the online reporting tool. I just wanted to check on the development of that, if there'll be some sort of email alerting functionality and it's granular on what's being done with that reporting tool, whether it's new schemes being added, what type of schemes, and whether residents as well as members can get email alerts from it rather than us having to consistently check it or refer people to the reporting tool, so they can just get that information straight in their inbox when things do change or added, or schemes they're interested in get added.
So the system is still being built at the moment. I've seen kind of the base, how it's going to look, and I've been shown what it can do. And I'm not overly technical myself, but from what I gather, it's kind of as malleable as we want it to be. So if we want regular updates to automatically be sent through as things change, I understand it can be. With regard to scheme submissions, I think the intention would be that, let's say, even if we do go down the route of having an option for the member of public to submit their suggestion, they would have to complete certain parts on a form to make sure we're getting the correct information, and that will be put forward into essentially an email that would go through to the county member to review. Again, this is just an option. It's something we can discuss when I present the system. But in response to your question, I think there's an awful lot we can do with it. And if that's what members want to see, if they'd like to be getting regular updates via email as things change, I think that's relatively straightforward for us to set up.
Yeah, I've been told it can be an all singing, all dancing mechanism for a number of the things that have been asked for me by the task to finish with.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could I just have a follow-up on that, if I may, Chairman? I was part of an initial group that explored that with Vicky Preston, the new online form that you've got. Just to note, it didn't work with Internet Explorer. So just as a point, I don't want you to develop a system and then we're all logging in on our systems here. But I think we use Internet Explorer on our laptops and it didn't work.
Okay, that point's down and take that way.
One of the things we found, and I think you've found as well, Councillor Scott, is it not one size fits all, and certainly not every panel all operates the same, or every chairman, and sometimes not even within the same panel. I'll just share with you something that works for me, and it goes back to this thing about schemes coming from individuals, and individuals could be one guy who's got a house near a school or something and he wants a zebra crossing put there or something, or it could be a row of houses, or it could be a little cul-de-sac that wants something. My own personal view is I'm happy to hear those questions and points, but the number one rule is if a resident or a group of residents want something to be taken to the LHP, I personally won't endorse it unless it's endorsed by the parish. So if somebody in Brightlingsea or Great Bentley says, I want to do this, or I want to do that, or I want to do something, my normal discussion is, right, I will say to that resident, your first stop isn't me, your first stop is your parish. So they've got to go to Brightlingsea Council, they've got to go to Great Bentley Council, they've got to convince Great Bentley Council that that's what is of benefit to Great Bentley. So I found that very simple to implement, to be honest. It's a pretty straightforward sort of set of circumstances. It would apply to almost anything else. And it has helped me because there are definitely circumstances where one little part of a village might want something, but the rest of the village don't want it at all. So bearing in mind, I don't want to be making the decision, because if this little bunch think it's a good idea and I endorse it, I'll be very good, upsetting everybody else. Equally, if I go with everybody else, I've upset a little group here. So that's my way of dealing with it and saying, absolutely interested in helping you. And by the way, here's a copy of the members' guide. And by the way, members of the parish council at Thorrington, this is a copy of the members' guide, which has all been given to every clerk, and they've made sure that every councillor has it. It's got to fulfil that requirement. So that's how I personally deal with it, and that way I don't get individual little schemes popping up out of nowhere that don't have local support.
As you say, Chairman, that's a matter for each individual.
Absolutely, it works for me, it may not work for everybody. Councillor Gadd.
Thanks very much. Just if we're doing the reallocation from rather than the 200,000 per council, would you mind just distributing the effects of that for next year?
We will.
Got an idea.
We'll come up with that.
This is probably from a district that's losing under that, I suspect, isn't it? Yes. That's the reason. I mean, a couple of other things. I agree with Holly about not having parish councillors on there. Because in our district, we've probably got 70 odd parishes. And so one parish councillor, it seems to me, isn't representative in the way the district are. But I mean, if that decision's been taken, then
I think the way it works at tendering council, we again avoid the issue. We say in us, we've got the Tendering District Association of Local Councils, TDALC.
And I think a lot of areas, Chairman, have exactly the same.
What we say to TDALC is, right, you get one person to come. So we don't,
okay.
That's what suits us. So again, we've pushed the problem away. We'd like to have someone represent, but the thing to be seen is quite clearly in here. You in your response, you talk about it's really good to keep in touch with local people and local councils. Well, the situation we have in most districts now is that there are enough double hatters. I can only speak for tendering. For tendering, we've got 8 county councillors. Well, 6 of those are district councillors. So we've already got a very good spin from our councillors who do a great job. Why the heck do we want another one? That's a personal opinion, and it's a bit like I would then fight and argue that say, well, okay, if you're going to let in a district councillor to come to our Essex County Council meeting and have a say and have a vote, wouldn't it be nice if we did it the other way round? And I don't think that's what they mean. That's what they want. So that was the original concept at the Essex County Council Local Highways Panel in tendering. There are more tendering councillors than there are district councillors. Sorry, there are more district councillors than there are county councillors.
By nature of the double hatters.
Yeah. Anyway.
Could I just follow up on one thing on that? Just for the officers' benefit as well. Could I just say, we've been talking today about what we put forward in terms of county councillors, district councillors and parish councillors, etc. I think what I've found in the last year that I've been involved with LHPs is that I found maybe missing some of the officers from those LHPs. I'm hearing from some of them where the officers may have appeared, maybe Justin or the design officer, proved an invaluable source to be able to identify, and have some input into those schemes as well. So we've been talking about district and county, but I think it'd be very useful to have some officers there as a thought as well, whichever officer that might well be. They just provide invaluable in-sources.
Marshall, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm going to use this point to record tribute to our officer team, who do a fantastic job, and therefore I agree with you. I think officers there who could actually say that is not a viable thing to do at that stage dampens down that expectations we're all talking about. We're saying, yes, we'll take that forward, and then a little bit down the line you realise it can't go forward. So I agree with you.
It's okay.
So I was just going to make it, sorry, just having a third point, just on the top-up side of it, because our district council gives £200,000 a year in addition. I think the only issues of it was that you obviously need to know well in advance so you can staff up for it. And then the second issue is just what happens with underspends if you can't spend the money. But I think that was all resolved pretty easily. Yeah. So I agree, it's a good idea.
Looking around the table, I can't see any other questions, in which case, Councillor Scott, thank you for your attendance and your presentation. But the most important thing to come out of this, I think, is this exactly what we've said. Task and finish, we haven't finished. We've got this informal meeting in July. Can I ask to make sure that's done before August? We can get that sorted, please. But then you're formally coming back to us in September as a committee with the bits and pieces that we haven't resolved. So in that respect, thank you very much for your attendance. which moves us on to item number 8, which is the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled to be Thursday, 21st July. I'm assuming it's going to be in this room, but I'll leave you to find that out. There is a spot for any urgent business. I have no urgent business nominated to me. I don't believe anybody else has asked for any business. But can I thank you all for your attendance, thank you all for your questions, and thank